Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for coming this morning. My name is Lisa Atkins. I'm the president of the Board of Directors of the Central Arizona Water Conservation District, also known as CAP, Central Arizona Project. And it is my pleasure to welcome you this morning and be part of the panel with regard to this Colorado River briefing. It is encouraging to see so many of you here today, and this is yet another testament twice this year of seeing exactly how engaged Arizona is in the effort to protect Lake Mead. And also, it is a good recognition of the importance of the Colorado River allocation that Arizona enjoys. Before we get started, I wanted to acknowledge some of the dignitaries who have joined us today. We have a member of the Fort McDowell Yavapai Apache tribe. I'm sorry, I'm playing with this microphone to try and get it to stay up. Yavapai Nation, I'm sorry. We have President Bernadette Burnett. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. We also have a member of the Bullhead City Council, Councilman Mark Clark, as well as a member of the Casa Grande School Board, David Snyder. Thank you all. Joining us at our webcast, we also have two members of the Prescott City Council, Jean Wilcox and Councilwoman Orr. We have the director of the Arizona Municipal Water Users Association, Warren Tenney, is here with us. And we have Legislative Counsel for the Legislature, Marge Ray, is here, as well as House Natural Resources Policy Advisor, Gina Cash. Thank you all for taking the time out of your schedule to be here today. We also, in addition to this room and the two others that you passed while you were on your way in, were joined by several people in Yuma, Tucson, and at the CAP headquarters, as well as Prescott and Flagstaff. And we're glad that those of you who are joining us electronically are taking time to join the conversation this morning. We appreciate you doing so from a remote location. Every one of us in this room and all of our broadcast locations are all stakeholders in the Colorado River. And while we won't be headed into shortage for 2017, the risks remain for 2018, and they continue to increase. And that certainly is not news to anyone in this room. The time is upon us to deal with even more challenging hydrologies, compromises, consequences than ever before. Under the steady hand and leadership of Director Tom Buschatzke and the Department of Water Resources, we're doing what we always do in Arizona, and that's approaching a conversation thoughtfully and deliberately with our partners in other states. As both an Arizonan and president of the CAP board, I want to thank you, Tom, for your leadership at DWR and for hosting us today, but most importantly for taking up the difficult task and guiding us at this challenging time in Arizona's water history. Well over a year ago, in April of 2015, CAP and DWR hosted a briefing of this kind at the old offices of DWR. It was the first time that we really wanted to gather everybody to talk about shortages on the river. Both DWR and CAP and I personally committed to you at that time that we would continue that dialogue, and we have continued to do so. Earlier this year, we got together. We co-hosted a meeting in May, and then CAP hosted 3 meetings for our stakeholders on the CAP system to continue a more specific conversation about drought contingency planning efforts. CAP had 3 different meetings with our stakeholders in ag, our tribal colleagues, and also our municipal colleagues, and they were productive conversations. Again, this room and all those watching from every part of Arizona, from the southernmost stretches to the northern part of our state, are a testament that the stakeholders on the Colorado River system extend well beyond those of us who were immediately here to discuss this operation today. We really do impact everything in the state. I just finished reading a book. For those of you who follow water history in the state, there's a new book out called Tall Paul about Senator Paul Fannin. And it once again revisits the strength that this state has had over the years because a disparate group of people who all had a vision for what this state would look like for their future, but more importantly for the future of their children and their grandchildren, put things aside that they might have otherwise taken into a room to talk about water and put them aside for the greater good of the state of Arizona. I think all of you being here today shows that we continue that spirit of Arizona. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Tom Buschatzke. Thank you all for being here.
Thanks, Lisa. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Tom Buschatzke, Director of the Arizona Department of Water Resources. Before I make some comments, I'm going to need to address some safety logistics. In each conference room, including this one, and all the satellite locations, there will be a DWR staff person with a red card. If you hear a fire alarm, and there he is in the back, that person will escort us out to the parking lot located on the northwest corner of 12th Avenue and Adams. So back to the issues at hand. I echo Lisa's comments about the importance of protecting Lake Mead and the need for all stakeholders to make that happen. We will continue to work diligently on efforts to protect Lake Mead and on the sustainability of the Colorado River system. Those efforts will require the continuing commitment from our stakeholders, the Colorado River Basin states, and the federal government. It will take patience and time, and incremental progress will be the path to success. With that, I'd like to introduce Ted Cooke, General Manager of the Central Arizona Project. Ted has been on the front lines with me in discussions with the Basin states and the Department of the Interior, and I want to thank him personally for that. He's somebody who I have on speed dial, even though he probably doesn't like it when my name comes up. So Ted is going to update us on the conditions of the Colorado River system.
Thank you and good morning. Thanks everyone for coming. We're excited to see this level of interest, both here and at our satellite locations. We will start with updates. Don't tell me. With updates of the. Can I have the keyboard, please? Updates of the slides that we've showed at our earlier events. This isn't doing it either. How about the mouse? There we go. Okay, we figured it out. Brief update for where we are at on the two major reservoirs on the Colorado River as of just last week. Lake Powell at 3,616 feet, 55% full. At the beginning of the year in 2000, the lake was nearly full at 21 million acre feet. Lake Mead last week, 1,073, almost 74 feet of elevation, 37% full, 9.5 million acre feet. Again, at the beginning of the year in 2000, the lake was nearly full. We have a combined storage in those two lakes of 46 million acre feet, and now we are at about 23 million acre feet. Before I move off this slide, I'd just like to mention that there's been a lot of commentary lately about how, gee, wouldn't that Lake Powell water fit just great in Lake Mead? And probably it would arithmetically, but this is not a measuring cup exercise here. Without having those two lakes working conjunctively, we would not be in this condition that we're in right now. And that's in a good sense. Lake Powell is a lake that allows the upper basin to deliver its commitment of water to the lower basin every year. Without that lake, that wouldn't happen. And if you think back, if we had not had two lakes, instead of having two half-full lakes, we'd have one empty lake right now. So the speculation about what could happen in the future and let's just drain Lake Mead into Lake Powell is not a good idea in my opinion. I think we've all seen this before, but just as a reminder, and this will be important for later when Director Buschatzke talks some more about what's next. 2007 guidelines, an agreement between the lower basin states and the Department of the Interior that when certain elevations were reached in Lake Mead, 1075, 1050, and 1025, that the lower basin would take shortages. California is, while they are a participant in the agreement, is not a participant in these shortages under that agreement. Mexico has also agreed to take similar shortages as part of the minute number 319 to the treaty between Mexico and the United States. And this, the concept, and those 2007 guidelines do a lot of other things, including define the conjunctive operation of the two lakes. But the premise behind these guidelines is let's have the states agree to what will happen if the lake continues to go down, so that the Secretary of the Interior will not act unilaterally. We would rather have some idea about what's going to happen than have an unpredictable event. Obviously, Arizona takes as the junior priority on the river. It takes the largest of the cuts. Virtually all of these cuts will flow to the Central Arizona project. Nevada takes a much smaller reduction because they have a much smaller allocation. And then here's the numbers for Mexico. We've seen this slide many times. I think we can't see it too many times because it reminds us of the seriousness of the situation that we're in. Back again in 2000, Lake Mead was almost full, and it's been a steady decline ever since then. We've had one of these so-called equalization releases, one release in 2014 that was less than a normal release from Lake Powell, but in average over this 17-year period, we have received in the lower basin an average or more release of water from Lake Powell. Even though there's a drought, the drought is not directly impacting Lake Mead, it's directly impacting Lake Powell. We have received in Lake Mead a full normal release every year. So why does Lake Mead continue to go down? It's what we refer to as the structural deficit. When the lake was originally allocated among the three lower basin states and then later the treaty with Mexico, more water was allocated based on the historical hydrology at the time that was done than really exists in the lake. And Tom has a nice chart that he'll show that illustrates that. So without enough of these coming along every 2-3 years, the lake continues to decline by about 12 feet. And it's getting perilously close to this first shortage tier of 1075 feet. The interesting thing, though, is when we blow up the tail end there in 2016, 17, and 18, even though it looks like we're about to cross this line, we can tell that the curve is being bent just a little bit. It's only a couple of data points. Maybe we need to back up a few here. That we see this, and this isn't just the way we drew the lines on the chart. I know we can fool around with the lines, but the slope of the curve in the last few years is less than the slope of the curve back here, and that's for two reasons. One is that we've been receiving a little bit more water out of Lake Powell than a normal release, which is 8.23 million acre feet. We've been getting 9, and Mother Nature is helping a little bit there with some better precipitation, even though it's still drought in the upper basin. Plus, we've been conserving water in the lake to keep the level up a little bit higher. So we've seen that in recent years, a combination of a little bit of help from the hydrology and a lot of help from us, all of us, is bending the curve a little bit. The current estimate for the end of the year 2016, and the reason that we're here today is last week's 24-month study for August was published and indicated that the estimate for the end of this year would be 1,078.93 feet, above the first trigger by almost 4 feet. And that's the way that the rules work, is that the August 24-month study projection for the end of the year will determine whether or not there will be a shortage for the following calendar year. So this big historical event just took place last week, and there will be no shortage in 2017, and we'll get more to that later. The estimate looking out now to the end of the following year, at the end of 2017, is less than a foot below the shortage trigger. Now, of course, between now and this time next year, the Bureau of Reclamation will continue to do 24-month studies every month, and we'll have another August 24-month study next year that will actually determine if there will be a shortage or not in 2018. But it's only a foot, and this is something that we have shown that we can do. We can move the lake up a foot higher than that by additional conservation efforts in 2017. And these are the type of efforts that we've done so far. I won't spend a lot of time on this, and there's plenty of information out there about this, but we have two primary programs in Arizona that both of which are in partnership outside of Arizona with other entities. And you see some of the names up there: Metropolitan Water District of California, the Bureau of Reclamation, Southern Nevada Water Authority, and then in the Pilot System Conservation Agreement, there are a multitude of parties. I won't name them all. Those two projects between end of 2014 and now have saved over 10 feet in the lake. It doesn't seem like a lot when we understand the lake is going down by 12 feet a year, but 10 feet was enough for us to avoid 2 years of shortage, 16 and 17, and within spitting distance, literally, of 2018. With respect to Arizona, that's nearly 1 million feet of declared shortage that we have avoided by these efforts that we've collectively done. And conservatively, that's $10 or $20 billion of economic value to the state of Arizona. So when we hear the question, is it worth it, what we've been doing on this conservation, and some of it is a little expensive, absolutely it's worth it by many, many factors of 10 to do this conservation. This I will just dwell on for 1 minute, but the importance of this chart from my perspective is to show that how comprehensive the participation within the state of Arizona has been to achieve the results that we just described. We have 12 ag participants in our 3 ag forbearance programs that we've done. We have 4 cities. We have 3 tribes, and this is just under those 2 programs that we showed on the previous page. There's lots of other work that has been done by other parties acting on their own. For instance, the Bureau of Reclamation has done some of its own conservation with the Fort McDowell Yavapai Nation. That's not on this page because it wasn't part of those 2 programs, but every little bit helps. This now may be hard to read. You should have seen the one we had before this one, though. We'd like to focus. And what this is this comes out in the latter part of the 24-month study release. The earlier part is what are the numbers going to be of the lake level so that we know is there a shortage or not. This one has more detail and shows by year, both for the Upper Basin Lake Powell and the Lower Basin Lake Mead. And what we like to focus is for every shortage tier, 1075, 1050, and 1025, what are the percentages of shortage at each of those levels? And as we know, for 2017, there's zeros across the board. There will be no declared shortage in 2017. In 2018, a 48% chance of a shortage at 1075. But you saw the numbers a moment ago. Only a foot lower is the projection, and that is without the models reflecting a lot of the conservation efforts that we've been doing. If we do similar things next year that we've been doing for the last couple of years, we can wipe that probability out. There's a zero probability of the 2 lower tier shortages. Then in 2019, we see a tier 2 shortage start to creep in here. It's only 10%. I'm not the modeler, but I'm guessing that if we do some things to improve what happens for 2018, that will influence what the 2019 probability of a tier 2 shortage. So while we may not be able to avoid a tier 1 shortage in 2019 by taking some steps to avoid a tier 1 shortage in 2018, we may also prevent a tier 2 shortage in 2019. So these benefits do accumulate. And then in 2020, we see tier 3 starting to peak over the horizon at 3%. And then in 2021, small probabilities of a tier 2 or a tier 3 shortage. And actually, some of these statistical anomalies, the probability of any shortage in 2021 of 56% is less in aggregate than it's been in the 2 previous years, but that's because the range of possibilities expands in the future, and we actually see on this line down here that the probability of a surplus occurring increases as well. So the further out in time you go, the more uncertain it is. That's not really a hard concept. We're focusing most closely on our near-term conservation efforts on how we can influence 18 and 19, and what Director Buschatzke is going to talk about is, so what happens after that, and what can we do starting now to bend the curve in some of those out years a little bit. So in summary, no shortage in 2017, about a 50% risk of shortage in 2018, but it's really close, the numbers and elevation. CAP and our partners are committed to continuing conservation programs like the MOU and the Pilot System Conservation Program, even though I failed to point out Arizona will have, by the end of this year, met our commitment under the MOU to conserve 345,000 acre feet, which is about 45% of the total commitment. But we're going to do the same thing as close as we can in 2017 and exceed our commitment. And the why? It's right up there. We have a chance to prevent shortage in 2018. The risks continue and increase in 2019 and 2021, and additional measures are needed to continue to bend that curve and hopefully to get the decline to actually level off, not just less of it, but stop at some point. I think that was my last slide. Yes, it was. Here's our new theme, Protect Lake Mead. It's our campaign. Keep an eye out for videos and other type of messages about what you all can do to help us with this work. Thanks. Back to Director Buschatzke, I think.
Thanks, Ted. Okay. For you. And
press the left button. Press it twice.
Okay, so Ted talked about the need to do additional actions beyond the things we've already done with the MOU and the System Conservation Program. And that's what my presentation will be about, the so-called Drought Contingency proposal that we've been working on with Nevada, California, and Bureau of Reclamation. I wanted to start out by talking a little bit about this slide. It is the historical period of record through 2012, essentially the observed hydrology. And you can see, I don't think anybody isn't aware of the variability of the flow of the Colorado River, the blue bars. The green line is averaging out that variability a bit. And you can see in the first 30 years, when the river was allocated, we were in an extremely wet period. If you take those 30 years out and smooth out this curve, it's pretty steady. It's going down a little bit from 1930 forward. So that's the long-term historical average, about 14.8 million or so. Lately, during the drought, we've been getting less water than that. When we started looking with the other basin states at what was happening with Lake Mead elevations moving forward, we thought we wanted to project forward not only the historic record, but something representative of the drought. And so we did this stress test hydrology from 1988 through 2012, and it's about 1.2 million acre feet or so less water than we got over the long-term historic record, and that's a significant difference. So this is one of the modeling runs we looked at, and we looked at this early on in 2013. This has been updated a few months ago by the Bureau of Reclamation, and it looks at the observed hydrology, the historic record, climate change projections done by Reclamation, and then a combination of some of the historic record and the climate change record. And what it's analyzing here is what would we need to do if we got to elevation 1025 at Lake Mead and didn't do anything to avoid getting there. How big a shortage might we have between now and 2026 under the 2007 shortage sharing guidelines that Ted went through? And the maximum amount in any 1 year is potentially 3 million acre feet with the observed hydrology. If you look at climate change or the combined hydrology, it gets a lot worse. You could have as big a shortage as 6 million acre feet, and you can see the years in which that might occur. The average shortage in those same time periods through 2026, again, for the observed is about 1 million. For climate change, about 2.8 million, and then for the combined, 2.3 million. These are obviously big numbers. Shortages in this range here are probably not something we are prepared to deal with. And the need to protect 1025 is really about avoiding Lake Mead crashing into the mud. And so at this elevation, with reasonable hydrology, you might only have 12 or 14 months before you get there. And just so everybody understands that if Lake Mead goes to dead pool, which is elevation 895, you can't move water past the dam. maybe in a few months during the spring runoff, the elevation would go up to a point where we could get some water out of the dam, but we would have monumental shortages in all of the lower basin and in Mexico. Again, we also looked at elevation 1,000. You can see the numbers. It's a little bit better, but still pretty big shortages that we might potentially see if we need to protect that elevation and don't do anything till we get there. So we did some modeling of the stress test hydrology, that 1988 to 2012 period, to come up with percentages of how we might fall within the existing shortage tiers. And so you can see the green line is the 50th percentile. You expect to be there about half the time. You rapidly fall in 2018 down to the first shortage tier below 1075. Again, Ted showed us the numbers with how much shortage would fall to Nevada, Mexico, and Arizona if we were in Tier 1. We hit, in this projection, Tier 2 in 2023, and you stay in Tier 2 through past 2026. If you do the 25th percentile, you go down into Tier 2 by 2022, and go down into Tier 3, 2023, it recovers a bit because the shortage volumes increase, but then you head back down again, back into that lower shortage tier. And in 10th percentile, you'd expect to see this 10% of the time. You rapidly fall into Tier 3 and stay there. So we wanted to change this graph. That is the goal of the drought contingency proposal that we've been talking about, is to make it less likely we'll end up in these tiers. This one. Oh, gosh. Okay, this is fun. Now what? Why did you do it? Okay, so the concepts that we've been dealing with for the drought contingency plan. The Upper Basin is working on their own plan. We hope to combine the two plans back together again in one plan when the time comes. But the Upper Basin is looking at a three-legged stool, as they like to call it, basically additional weather modification in the Upper Basin, looking at re-regulating some of their Upper Basin reservoirs to move water to Lake Powell, and then conserving water among their water users and shepherding that water to Lake Powell. Their goal is to protect Lake Powell and the power head at Lake Powell. Our goal is to protect those draconian shortage elevations in Lake Mead, stop Lake Mead from crashing. We're taking actions now. Ted went through those with what we can do now through conservation. But we need additional tools that we can utilize through the pendency of the guidelines, which again expire in 2026. So we're looking at a new agreement that would further the implementation of the guidelines. It would be an overlay to the guidelines, not in replacement of the guidelines. Let's try this again. So again, we want to avoid and protect against the potential for the lake to decline to elevations below 1020. This would include a commitment by the United States to work to create or conserve Colorado system water, and we'll show you a chart with the volumes of water in a subsequent slide here. This additional reductions that we would agree to take, at some point if the lake recovered, you would be able to recover those reductions as long as they were created by system conservation or by conservation. We want to incentivize the creation of ICS. ICS is intentionally created storage, a program that was put in place as part of the 2007 guidelines. That program allows an entity to conserve water and keep it in Lake Mead in their name, and that can be taken out at a later point in time. So one of the flexibilities that we've been talking about in this drought contingency plan is that at lower elevations in Lake Mead, elevations when you are in a shortage pursuant to the guidelines, so that first tier being below 1075, you would still be able to take out intentionally created surplus out of the lake. Under the 2007 guidelines, you can only take out that intentionally created surplus in a normal or surplus year. Under the Bid 319 with Mexico that Ted touched on earlier, their equivalent ICS program is called ICMA, Intentionally Created Mexican Allocation. In Bid 319, when Mexico takes a shortage, for example, the 50,000 acre-foot shortage at 1075, if they have 50,000 acre-feet of ICMA in the lake, they can essentially take that 50,000 acre-feet back and be kept whole to 1.5 million acre-feet, but you do get the benefit of the shortage reduction. And then there are detailed evaporation losses assigned to intentionally created surplus under the 2007 guidelines, and we would alter some of that. Both of those things, again, are to incentivize the creation of intentionally created surplus. We heard from Nevada and California that the way the 2007 guidelines work now, you can end up stranding water in the lake. I think to some degree Arizona likes stranding water in the lake, but California and Nevada see that as a disincentive to creating additional volumes of intentionally created surplus. So here are the different additional water use reductions laid on top of the 2007 guidelines for each state, California, and then Reclamation's commitment. So we'll start on the left side here. Here's Lake Mead elevations. Under the guidelines, the first shortage is at 1075. Here you see 1075 to 1050. In Arizona, it takes 320,000. Nevada, 13. California, 0. Under this new proposal, at 1090, so between 1090 and 1075, Arizona would take a new 192,000 acre-foot shortage. Total for all the shortages, 192. Nevada takes 8,000, same proportion that they would take under the guidelines. California, again, 0. The U.S. has the 100,000 acre-foot commitment. And again, going back down, repeating the 1075, we would take our 192 additional plus our 320 for a total of 512. Nevada's total would be 21,000. California's still at 0. In Tier 2, the current Tier 2, between 1050 or below 1050, Arizona bumps up to 400,000 under the guidelines, which still take that additional 192. For a total of 592,000, Nevada goes up to 25. California's still at 0. At 1045 is when California starts to take additional reductions. Our drought contingency reduction, so to speak, bumps up to 240, which makes our total 640. Nevada's bumps up to 27,000. California takes 200,000. And then you can see in 5-foot increments down to 1025, the volumes of shortage for Arizona under the DCPs stay the same for Nevada until you get to 1025, but California is going up by 50,000 acre-foot increments. So this was the basis of the plan. Arizona and Nevada would agree to take additional drought reductions. California would agree to take them at lower elevations. Again, California having the super priority on the law of the river and no legal requirement to take any shortages, all in return for more flexibility for California. And the reason California is so interested in this flexibility, I think, in my opinion, is that during the last several years of drought in California, when their state water project in one year had 5% allocations and greatly reduced allocations in other years, they took about 700,000 acre-feet of intentionally created surplus out of Lake Mead. Again, they were able to do that because Lake Mead was above 1075. I think they realized that if that same state water project drought hits California in the future when Lake Mead is below 1075, under the current framework, they would not be able to take any of that water out of the lake, and they would have had a bit of a problem in Southern California. One last thing to point out in the total column, the total from the drought contingency plan and the guidelines is 1.2 million acre-feet. That's about twice the total just under the guidelines. When Ted talked about the structural deficit, he pointed out, I think, that the structural deficit is on average 1.2 million acre-feet. We did not come up with that number because of that factor. However, it is no surprise that coming up with that same amount of water in reductions as a structural deficit helps accomplish that goal of changing those percentiles, those probabilities we talked about earlier in the graph. And here is that graph again on the top half of this slide, the no action part. Those are the lines we already went through. But in the bottom graphic, we're comparing what we would do with no action. Again, no action includes the guidelines, but no DCP. Here we looked at the guidelines plus DCP. So again, repeating the green line, where you are half the time, 50th percentile, you dip down into the first tier, and you stay there. Even with the 25th percentile, you dip down into the second tier, but you don't go below it. And in this worst case scenario, the 10th percentile, you do dip down to tier 3 briefly, 1 year, but then you recover because, again, the size of the shortages. So we think this is a measure of success, bending the curve, so to speak, like Ted talked about earlier. And there's significant protection for the lake not crashing by taking these DCP actions. Again, it means, though, that Arizona's got to take additional shortages that were not planned for under the guidelines. So we're continuing with the drought contingency effort. We continually look at our demand, the hydrology, and our distribution to our water users through modeling to frame the range of impacts. Again, the non-Indian agricultural pool, which really is tribal, municipal, and industrial water users have some of that water, is negatively impacted. Tribal entities are impacted. The agricultural pool, which is the second most junior priority within the CAP deliveries after excess water, which basically is water banking water or water stored underground by the federal government or replenished by the CHRD. That's impacted first, then the agricultural pool, and then the folks in the non-Indian ag pool, tribes, munis, and industry. We've talked to the folks in Yuma who have the senior priority water rights. We've had discussions with them about participating potentially in some of these reductions for Arizona. If they did, they would lessen the impacts on the CAP water users. There's no clear path forward on where that issue stands right now with our on-river water users. We're going to continue to talk with our Arizona customers about achieving a consensus within Arizona to see if we can build support for this drought contingency plan given the additional impacts that go beyond the shortages in the shortage guidelines. We've had a strong communication and messaging effort. We started probably the end of April with an op-ed in the Arizona Republic, followed by several different articles in newspapers in the West and about the drought contingency plan. We still need to, once we come to closure with our internal Arizona water users, we still need to close the loop among the lower basin states and with reclamation. When that happens, there will be some boards that might need to take action. CAP might be one of those boards, but irrigation district boards and metropolitan water district in Southern California, folks like that, Southern Nevada Water Authority, taking board actions on the Drought Contingency Plan. We hope that can happen in the fall, October, November, and at least have that deal set from a state perspective towards the end of the year. For the Arizona Department of Water Resources, for me to sign off on this Drought Contingency Plan, I need to go to the Arizona legislature for a concurrent resolution. That was done by the director of DWR for the 2007 guidelines and for Minute 319 with Mexico. We also need federal legislation, which we might target for the spring of 2017. That federal legislation has to deal with the flexibility elements of the Drought Contingency Plan. There are some prohibitions on how the Secretary operates, and to give that flexibility some finality, we need some federal legislation. So we would be looking at, if all these things come together, having the Drought Contingency Plan be in effect for the calendar year deliveries starting January 1 of 2018. Of course, the process leading up to those deliveries really starts in about October, when folks have to give their CAP water orders, and then I think the tribes do their water orders in November, and then Reclamation certifies all the orders, and we put together all the delivery plans for all the water users in all 3 states. So here's just a slide, and I'll just leave this up. Places where you can find information about Colorado River, about the DCP, conservation programs, et cetera, that Ted talked about. DWR's website, CAP's website, the board meetings of CAP, Arizona Water Banking Authority meetings, and Groundwater User Advisory Council meetings in each one of the AMAs. So you can get lots of detail there. And there's 2 email addresses for you to get more information from both DWR and CAP. So with that, I think I'll have one last call if folks want to ask questions, to fill out blue cards, and I think we'll get into that portion of the agenda.
So far,
anyone else with blue cards? If not, I think Katasha's going to go through them.
we have one from a satellite location in Tucson. They're asking about Minute 319 was helpful because Mexico shared in some of the shortage requirements, and they're asking what the prospect is of them doing the same thing in 32X.
So formal negotiations with Mexico began in May of 2015. I am the representative for the state of Arizona, and Ted is my alternate, although we have a common agreement that alternates don't show up to the meeting at Mexico's request. So it's an easy job for Ted. But seriously, we've made some great progress with Mexico. We have shared similar presentations on the risk to Lake Mead, the modeling. We've shared our desire to take additional actions to protect Lake Mead. The response has been very positive from Mexico. There's a bit of a chicken and egg here, I think. If we close the successor minute to Minute 319, which we don't have a number, so we're calling it Minute 32X, that might happen before the end of the year. We can't fully commit to the Drought Contingency Plan until at least we get the federal and legislation and I get the state authorization from the legislature. So there's a chicken and egg there, but we continue to talk positively. We are talking about many of the elements that were in Minute 319, the surplus sharing, shortage sharing, environmental aspects. We're talking about repeating that, so to speak, in the next minute. And actually, I will be heading off to Juarez on Wednesday to have some more meetings in both Juarez and El Paso Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday of this week. So we'll have probably a better idea about where we are with the new minute or the successor minute probably by the end of September. And again, if that Minute 32X follows the format of Minute 319, I will also need to go to the legislature, as Sandy Favors-Whitney did in 2014 for Minute 319. Anyone else, Katasha?
We have one other, and we're trying to look through the slides and see exactly which slide it's referencing. It says, I do not understand why the shortage numbers were lower for elevation 1,000 versus 1025 in the slide that included a table.
It's your slide number 2. Because it's easier to protect a lower elevation.
Yeah. Hold on. Okay. So that was a slide where we talked about absolutely protecting 1025 and 1,000. Just because the 1,000 is lower, you don't need as much water to keep it there than you do to keep it above 1025.
That's all we have from remote sites. Anything in the room?
Thank you. Thanks for all the work you guys have done. This is really incredible. I guess my observation has continued to be the same, and recognizing California's priorities. I find it odd that they really don't even start contributing to the crisis for a while. Is there any opening there with the governor? Is there any opening there with their legislature to talk about? It would seem to me that some small contributions along the way goes a long way at the as we stretch these schedules out. Can you give an update? Is there any opening to have more conversation with them?
Whether there's an opening or not, I don't know, but I guess sharing what we talked about over the years that have led to the point we're at right now is that they feel strongly that Arizona was aware of this situation occurring eventually over time back in 1968. We agreed to the junior priority then. We didn't get the augmentation, perhaps, that we expected as part of that for the Colorado River system, but they were very adamant that they couldn't see taking shortages before we at least went below 1050 and into that second tier in terms of, again, how their water user review taking reductions when they have the senior priority. So I would never say never, but we talked a lot about where we would start with different elevations, and this is where we were able to land and where they thought they could get their water users to achieve a consensus about this deal the way we're working with our water users. You want to add anything?
Just a little bit. These conversations have gone on for months and months and months, and there have been offers and counteroffers and proposals, and if you do this, and we will do that. So I would echo what Tom said, is that there's probably always an opportunity to change the conversation. But after this period of time in a negotiation, every time that happens, the other folks want something else, and we found a happy place, if you will, at the levels that we've shown before. I think the main thing was that California feels very strongly they shouldn't have to do this at all, but would feel most comfortable selling it back home if Arizona and Nevada were in a second-tier shortage already. That's where the 1045 came from, where they would begin to participate, because that's just below 1050, where the other two states would already be into it a little bit. The grand bargain in the DCP proposal is that California gets some agreement from Arizona and Nevada to have this flexibility below 1075 in exchange for sharing at lower elevations. When things become more dire. That's the basis of this. Exactly how to tune that in to what amounts and at what elevations, that took months and months and months to hammer out.
And just one other thing we didn't talk about today, there's also the principle of a backstop in the DCP. And so the parties, again, if we make this final, have agreed to collectively take actions to absolutely protect the lake elevation of 1020. And that would occur when projections forward project you're going to fall below 1020, so it's somewhere below 1045. So those actions really are undefined yet, but that is what would give us a lot of comfort, I would say, that we're not going to crash the lake. And again, a lot of what the DCP is. We're going to have to give up some water at the higher elevations in return for making sure that we can manage the shortages that we might see at the lower elevations and not end up with those big numbers we showed, the 1 to 3 million acre-foot shortages to protect 1020 or 1025 or 1,000.
Another blue card from the room. Please address the criteria for recovery of ICUs banked in mead.
Sure. So the elevation that we agreed to with California and Nevada is 1110. And again, like Ted said earlier, we looked at a lot of different elevations. We wanted it to be higher. California wanted it to be lower. There's a key trigger point at 1105 in the 2007 guidelines in terms of how Lake Powell and Lake Mead are balanced. It was important, we thought, to the upper basin states who don't want to see water leave Lake Powell into Lake Mead beyond what we agreed in the guidelines, to not impact that elevation 1105. So we settled on 1110 as the recovery elevation.
Another one from in the room. Is it anticipated that all CAP users will be required to share in the new reductions, or will there be a voluntary program to meet the reduction target?
The way that the DCP would be structured is similar. As Tom mentioned, it would be an overlay to the 2007 guidelines. So if the quantity that's available to CAP is reduced by the Secretary of the Interior, then the mechanism that operates is the CAP priority system. So if CAP takes an additional, let's say, 192,000 acre feet under the DCP, that would just be less water that's available, and the higher priority tiers would be impacted first. So it wouldn't be within CAP. There's a voluntary program or some type of recruitment for folks who would participate. It would be the priority pools operating. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't use the priority pools to have some higher priority users forbear or something like that, and let the lower quantity of water flow to the higher priority users. But the starting point is the priorities work the way the priorities work.
And I'll just add that what we're talking to stakeholders about are ways that perhaps there are some things we can do to potentially mitigate or soften those impacts in priority, and that's one of the things we're talking with folks about.
Another one from Tucson. Would BOR getting 100% credits for unconstructed effluent pool incentivize intentionally created surplus?
So I think what this question is about is under the Sawarsa deal, the federal government has an obligation to, I think, get some credits or get some water to the Honatam Nation. They've been creating those credits by putting reclaimed water into the Santa Cruz River under the WR program. They only get 50% credit for that effluent, and they've been asking the WR for several years now to increase that to 100%. That wouldn't have, I don't think, any impact on any of this or do anything for Lake Mead, and there are other issues that I won't get into now about why it might not be a good idea to do that.
Those are all the blue cards we have for now.
We were joined by some other elected officials and representatives of elected officials here and at our remote locations. I'd like to recognize Buchanan Davis, who is here from Senator Flake's office, as well as a member of Representative Kirkpatrick's staff that has joined us at our remote location in Flagstaff. Leslie Myers is here from the Bureau of Reclamation. Welcome. Hunter Moore, who is Governor Ducey's Policy Advisor for Natural Resources, is here in the room with us. As well, you heard Corporation Commissioner Andy Tobin ask a question. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today, Commissioner Tobin. We also have an additional member of the Prescott City Council, Councilman Sischka, is joining us in Prescott, and a colleague of mine on the CAP board, Sharon Megdal, who's the secretary of the board, is joining us in Tucson. These events could not happen without the work of our staffs, and I'd like to thank DWR for hosting us today, and more importantly, thank the staff of DWR and CAP for putting all this together, including our remote location hookups. So journeys like this, like the one that we're on, don't happen overnight. We know that historically in Arizona. They require significant momentum. Sometimes it slows down, sometimes we need to force it to catch up with the realities of the day. What's being contemplated is no simple administrative task. It's taken decades to bring us to this point in a dialogue that we know took a lot of effort to get us to this point, and we're going to see whether or not we have the collective effort to get to the next step. It's my hope in the days ahead that we will continue to explore the question and develop a consensus, yes or no. The legacy of those who came before us teaches us that we have the grit and determination to do what must be done when necessary. The legacy we leave for those in the future is up to us, those in this room, those at our remote locations, those who have an interest in protecting the lifestyle that we enjoy and the one that we've really created with all the dedication to issues such as water in the state of Arizona. I have every confidence that we're going to keep plugging away with open minds and creativity, and that we'll find a way to adequately protect Lake Mead. Thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here today. We look forward to continuing on this journey with all of you. Thank you.